Hello and welcome to our discussion this evening. I hope you've had a good week and been able to get out and about a little bit, out of lockdown, and found some enjoyment. Before we start, let's think about our motivation as we normally do. Again, the best motivation is to attain enlightenment, not only for ourselves, but for countless other sentient beings, all other sentient beings as well. For those of you who've been with us, I've explained motivation a number of times. Those of you who've been with us before. Basically, in Buddhism, we attend a Dharma teaching like this or a discussion to attain enlightenment. But basically, that's our aim, to attain enlightenment. And if we can include not only ourselves, but all other beings as well, all other living beings as well, in our motivation, it makes the motivation much more powerful. Instead of the object only being one person, it is a multitude of beings. And instead of the happiness of only one person being involved, it is the happiness of all beings everywhere. So you can see there's a motivation that includes all beings everywhere is much more powerful than a motivation that only includes one person. So as we take a moment to look into our motivation and see whether it is pure or not, or how strong it is, let's try to make it as powerful as possible and turn it from anything that's small into something that's vast, and that will bring the greatest amount of positive potential. And let's just have a look at our motivation for a moment. Thank you very much. So we're going through this text called The Three Principles of the Path, or the Three Principal Aspects of the Path, by Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelugpa tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. And if you remember, the three principles are renunciation, bodhicitta, and the correct view of reality, or the pure view. We've been looking, and in the beginning of the text, we've been starting to look at renunciation, and what do we mean by renunciation? Now, of course, as I've said many times before, often Westerners think that renunciation means having to go and sit in a cave in the forest or in the mountains and sleep on a bit of twigs and eat very basic food and drink water and nothing else. But if our mind is still craving the soft bed and the good food and TV and movies and sex and all that sort of thing, if we're sitting in the cave and our mind is still longing for those things, craving for those things, then, and the other attractions of cyclic existence, then of course we're not actually practicing renunciation at all. And it's pretty useless sitting in a cave if the mind is still sitting in a comfortable house somewhere watching TV or indulging in the other comforts of our civilization. So renunciation has to do much more with craving and longing than it has with giving up meat or giving up whatever you think you should give up. It has to do with the giving up in the mind, the craving in the mind. And if you remember the verse that we were speaking about last week, it goes like this: "For you embodied beings bound by the craving for existence, without the pure determination to be free from the ocean of existence, there is no way for you to pacify the attractions to its pleasurable effects. Thus, from the outset, seek to generate the determination to be free. So what is it that you are attached to, that you crave for? What is it in your life that you say, I can't do without that. I must have that. Where does your mind turn when you try to sit in meditation and look into your experience? What comes up in your mind? What sort of comforts do we crave? What are we prepared to give up? What are we prepared to give up to be actually free? And what are we not prepared to give up to actually be free? So if I said to you, okay, you can be completely free of all your sufferings, of all discomfort, of all dissatisfaction, completely and utterly free, but you must surrender. Then what would you be prepared to surrender? Would you be prepared to surrender all those things that you think, I can't give that up, I can't give that up? Would you be prepared to surrender even your body? Would you be prepared to give up your body to be completely free of all dissatisfaction, all suffering, all discomfort, completely forever, never again to be experienced? What would we surrender for that state? Of course, even some of us might even be clinging onto our sufferings and not be willing to give up our sufferings. Some people, of course, have some attachment to their suffering. Their suffering seems to bring them some reward of some kind, maybe other people's sympathy or aversion from another, even deeper suffering. But very often we put up with the suffering situation because we think that the alternative is going to be so much worse. Even if we give up the suffering, then the alternative, the suffering that we go through alternatively, will be even worse than this. So I'll put up with this suffering, so I don't have to put up with the deeper suffering. So even suffering can be something that we are attached to, that we grasp at as a kind of pleasurable effect of samsara. So we have to ask ourselves, what am I prepared to give up? What am I prepared to surrender to attain this state of complete freedom, state of liberation? And this quote says that without the pure determination to be free from the ocean of existence, in other words, completely free, we have to train our mind to surrender everything, even our body, even this precious body that we have. We have to train our mind to surrender that, to renounce that, to have no craving for our body. Until we can get that determination, where we see samsara as in the text it sometimes describes samsara as a pit of snakes or a pit of scorpions that you're bound up in, and you want to get free from this pit of scorpions. That's how much one wants to be free and is prepared to give up just about everything to be free. The Buddha himself, in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, talked about the origin of our suffering. And this is what he said, and the translation comes from Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's a very great monk of our age, who's translated many of the Buddha's teachings. And this is how he translates this quote from the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. This is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is this craving which produces repeated existence, is bound up with delight and lust, and seeks pleasure here and there, namely for sense pleasures, craving for existence, craving for non-existence. So it's that craving for pleasure, and pleasure here covers a vast array of things. It's not just one or two pleasures that we might think of. But as I said before, some people might even get some pleasure out of what we would call suffering. So it's craving for any type of sense pleasure, um, any type of delight and lust, that as the Buddha says, any type of delight and lust and pleasure that we seek, sense pleasures that we seek. Also, the craving for existence and the craving for non-existence. The craving here for existence means, as we'll see a little bit later, craving for taking a body, and craving for non-existence, in one sense, means craving not to exist at all. Like, if you find yourself in such depression, then there's a craving not to exist, to stop your life, to stop existing in this type of way. So there's that interpretation of craving of non-existence. But anyway, the Buddha says, seeking pleasures, sense pleasures, craving for existence, craving for non-existence. This is what we have to renounce, what we have to give up. And the Buddha also in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, of course, as you know, he said, there is a way to get from here, from where we are, entangled in our karma and afflictive emotions and our suffering. There is a way to get from here to that state that is completely free of all suffering, completely free of all discomfort and dissatisfaction. And there is that state, and there is a way to get there. So we have to determine, I want to go there. I want to be in that state. I want to transform this state into that state, so that I never have to suffer any kind of discomfort or suffering or dissatisfaction ever again. I want to be in that state, and I will do everything and anything to be able to live in that state. We have to try and get that determination. That's what this. So that is what this verse is saying. The first on our spiritual path, the first thing we do, and our first job, is to examine our situation, our current situation, and see whether it brings us long-term lasting satisfaction or not, long-term happiness. Does it really bring us the happiness that we in our depths we want? That state of being completely free of all dissatisfaction and suffering, the state of peace, the state of peace and bliss. How much do we want that, and how much are we prepared to put up with this endless cycle of samsara, this endless cycle of going from suffering to some small pleasure, and then that pleasure wearing out again, and we go back to some sense of lack, some sense of dissatisfaction, and look around for another kind of satisfaction that will distract us from that sense of lack for a few moments. And so it goes on and on endlessly. So we have to see that this is not satisfactory. This way of doing things for us is not satisfactory. And we've been doing it for so many lifetimes. We've been doing it for lifetime after lifetime. And when are we going to come to the decision, well, I can't stand this anymore. It's just too much. I can never be free if I keep on doing what I'm doing now and keep on living this type of existence. It's always going to lead me back to the nature of suffering, into dissatisfaction and pain. And sometimes the suffering will be extremely great. Sometimes the suffering will be only very subtle, but sometimes it's very great. And in the Buddhist concept of the cycle of existence, we go from one to the other, always cycling around. Sometimes we think, well, if I have enough if I have enough money, or if I have enough this, or I have enough that, then I'll be completely satisfied. I won't need any more. But as we all know, that's actually not the truth. As we saw last week with the survey on the wealthy, that even when you have a huge amount of money in the bank, and you so much money that there's no possibility, so much wealth that there's no possibility that you'll be able to spend it all or enjoy it all in one lifetime, nevertheless, people in that situation are still grasping and still unhappy. They're not happy. Haven't reached the final peace. And this is the same with all our attachments. That it doesn't matter how much we get, how much we accumulate. It's not going to bring us the satisfaction, the long-term satisfaction that we want. Remember what the quote that the psychologist, who is a counselor of the wealthy, said in regards to the survey. I'll just read that quote again. Sometimes I think that the only people in this country who worry more about money than the poor are the very wealthy. They worry about losing it. They worry about how it's invested. They worry about the effect it's going to have. And as the zeros increase, the dilemmas get bigger. So this is not, we can apply this not only to the wealthy, but to all our cravings, all our attachments, that it doesn't matter how much we get, the dissatisfaction just increases. It doesn't decrease, it just increases. So the more that we get, the more that we indulge in our attachments and our cravings, the more we grasp. We have a craving, and then we grasp out, and we possess what we crave. The more we suffer. This is what the Buddha is saying. That whenever we have craving, that is where our problem is going, where our suffering is going to be. Wherever we have craving, and it doesn't matter whether it's craving for money or for food or for sex or for partners or for whatever the mind is craving, it will lead us to a state of suffering. And again, I think I told you in an earlier program about the Buddhist monk who developed attachment, a great deal of attachment to his bowl. And in his next life, he was born as a worm in that bowl. So that is where our craving takes us. That's where our attachment takes us, to another state of dissatisfaction and suffering. So when we're talking about samsara, when we're talking about cyclic existence, it's not the money, it's not the food, it's not the environment. Some people say work is so much samsara. They don't like their job, so they say work is so much samsara. But actually, it's not the work that's in samsara. It's not the work that is the samsara. If work was samsara, and samsara is the nature of suffering, then everybody in that job would see the work as in the nature of suffering and be displeased by it. But that's not actually true. You go to a workplace, you'll see that some people don't like the work at all. Some people really enjoy the work, love what they're doing. So the work, it is not dependent on the work, whether you get satisfaction or not. It is depending on the mind that is engaged in the work. Whether the mind is craving for something else, or maybe craving to be at the job, or maybe craving not to be at the job. There is the point of suffering. Whatever is going on in the mind, there is the point of suffering. It is not the outside world. It is this body and mind that we have, that we've actually taken through, from a Buddhist point of view, we've actually taken this body and mind through craving, through our karma and through our reflective emotions, and dying and then craving to take life again. One person I read that said, we keep on taking life because we see it as a hit. It's like a druggie takes a drug. Every time they take it, they see it as a hit of pleasure. And when we go through life after life, we go through, we search when we die, our mind, our consciousness searches for another life, another body, because it's such a hit, even though we know that another life, another body could be in the nature of great suffering. I don't know about that, but I just brought it in. As I thought it was quite a nice description of how the mind looks for the hit all the time. With craving, you're always looking for the hit, for the whether it is for food or whatever it is, it's craving for the hit, to get that hit. And so you can imagine that when we die, the mind is again searching for another body, driven by this craving for another hit of life. And Geshe Sonam Rinchen explains exactly what cyclic existence is. When we talk about samsara or cyclic existence, or if you want to talk about the ocean of existence, as the quote talks, Lama Tsongkhapa talks about it, Geshe Sonam Rinchen, who was a great teacher at the Tibetan Library Works and Archives, had many students around the world. He wrote this in his commentary on this text. Cyclic existence is not a place. Places are easy enough to leave. Nor does cyclic existence only affect certain species or groups of people. It affects every ordinary living being. Our lack of understanding is the root of our suffering and is responsible for all our troubles. The emphasis placed on education is a sign that this is generally recognized, but the knowledge most educational institutions impart is relevant only to the concerns of this life and therefore cannot help to free us. In the 12-part process through which we remain within cyclic existence, ignorance, craving, and grasping prepare the ground for suffering. What he's talking about here is what we call the 12 links of dependent arising. When he says the 12-part process, he's talking about the 12 links of dependent arising, which most Buddhists have come across. But three of the links, and the 12 links of dependent arising show how we move from one life to another, how we create the karma that takes us from one life to another. And three of the 12 links are ignorance, craving, and grasping. And so this ignorance, which is the first link, is the ground for this 12-part process that takes us from one life to another, to another, to another, to another, and to another, and so on and so forth, endlessly. If we don't put an end to it, it will go on endlessly, because it's driven by this craving, this continuous craving. And so the 12 links are like one of these self-generating machines that doesn't need fuel. It just keeps on going, keeps on going, keeps on going. And that's what cyclic existence is like. If we don't put a stop to the craving, because the craving just feeds itself, it just keeps on going, and keeps us in the cycle of existence and in samsara. So Geshe Sonam Rinchen goes on, ignorance is our confusion regarding the fundamental nature of things, particularly of the self. Without it, the strong sense of I does not arise. Though there is a self, our ignorance magnifies it disproportionately, causing intense disturbing emotions to arise. So he's saying, although there is a conventional self, what we do is we magnify it and we magnify. How we magnify it, we see it as something independent and truly existent from its own side, and we place our greatest importance on it. We see it as intensely important, the most important thing in our whole existence. We have that sense of I, of me, and mine. Focusing on this false self, we are preoccupied with its happiness. Craving is the desire for that happiness. So we have this huge sense of self, and this sense of self is looking for happiness. It wants everything that satisfies itself. And so it goes out. It's always looking for this happiness and craving. That's where the craving comes in. The craving, the desire for this happiness. While grasping reaches out for it. So we have this craving, and then we identify and we go with the craving, and that leads us to grasping and holding and possessing. These two, craving and grasping, must be stopped if we are to gain nirvana. Nirvana, of course, is liberation. How is it done? He goes on. First, create a good motivation to do what is constructive and turn your mind towards the teachings. So first of all, develop a very positive motivation that your life will always from now on go in the positive, constructive way, rather than a destructive way, rather than giving into the afflictive emotions and the craving and the grasping and all that sort of thing. Turn your mind towards the teachings. So the teachings, here the teachings are the Buddhist teachings, but we must also understand that the Buddhist teachings are not something ultimate and independent of themselves. They are a useful path to the state of peace. But they are not something, the Buddha never said that his teachings are some kind of ultimate existence, something that's ultimate. He said that, he made it quite clear that at some stage we will have to give up the teachings, that the teachings will no more be relevant to us, and that we must leave the teachings in the same way that somebody that has crossed a river on a boat leaves the boat on the back of the river, on the other side, on the other bank of the river, and doesn't put the boat on their back and cart it with them to the mountains. In the same way. So from the beginning, we put our trust in the teachings, in the Dharma and the teachings. But if we allow our mind to see the teachings as something independent and ultimate, and we get fundamental about them, then actually we will be abusing the teachings and doing something that is opposite to the intention of the teachings and opposite to our own motivation to become liberated. If we see the teachings in that way, then actually we cannot become liberated, because the teachings will become our fundamental crutch and something that we cling on to. It'll become another craving, another attachment, another grasping. So we have to be aware that the teachings are there to help us along the way, and not something that we can get all fundamental about. Geshe Sonam Rinchen goes on, work at decreasing your desires and cultivate contentment. Just this alone would increase your happiness dramatically, whereas the insatiable desire for better friends, lovers, and possessions creates a continual and depressing sense of poverty. Let's just take a look at that. Here where I'm living, I've had quite a few conversations about what it means to be in abundance and what it means to be in lack. So lots of people think that to be in abundance, you not need lots of possessions, you need good food, you need a big house, a nice multi-million-dollar house, 3 or 4 cars, and so on, and enough food that you can easily eat all day if you want to, all this sort of thing. So abundance means having lots of everything. But actually, that's not the real meaning of abundance. Abundance means the mind that is contented and sees that everything is fulfilled. Everything that is necessary is there. And even more than what is necessary is there. And the mind that rejoices in having everything that is needed. Even a beggar can be in abundance. A beggar, even a beggar can have the mind of abundance and can experience abundance. But the mind that is always looking for more, the mind that is always craving for more, even in the rich man, even in the man who's got $1 billion or $3 billion in the bank, if his mind is still looking for more, still wanting more, still grasping and craving for more, that mind is a mind of lack. That is that person, even though they may have $1 billion in the bank and a multi-million-dollar house and several motor cars and blah blah blah, swimming pool and all everything that we think is amazing in samsara. Even if that person has all that, but their mind is still looking for more, that person is the beggar. That person is the beggar. Whereas the person whose mind is contented, whose mind is free from desire, is free from craving, free from wanting more, satisfied with what they've got, and is willing to spread their happiness, spread their whatever they have to others, seeing that seeing that what they have is more than enough. More than enough, even if it's only a cup full of rice, that's all they have, and the clothes, the ragged clothes on their body. But they see that is enough, and I have more than I need, and they share it with others. That person, their mind is in the mind of abundance, and that's the sort of mind that Geshe Sonam Rinchen is talking about here. The mind that is not looking for more, not looking for better all the time, more and better. You think of the mind. Let's just take an example. Let's take an example of Apple, for instance. When Apple brings out a new iPhone, and people immediately try to sell off their old iPhone, which might be the latest one before this new one. That might be the very latest one before this new one, but they immediately try to sell it off so that they can go and buy the next one. Or they don't even wait to sell it off. They just go and buy the next one, so that they can say, I've got the latest iPhone. So you can see in their mind that they've developed this mind of craving, that they always have to have the latest one. The latest one is always the most important one, the one that they have to have. And so even when they get the latest one, in the mind, some part of the mind is still thinking of the next one to come and how I'm going to get the next one to come, how much better the next one will be than this one. And so it's the craving and the grasping. That is the mind of lack. That is the mind of the beggar. Never satisfied, always wanting more. And so we have to look into our minds, and we have to see where our mind is doing that, where our mind is seeing is lacking, where there's a lack in our mind, and examine that lack and see why we are seeing that as a lack. So, okay, maybe we do need, food and so on to keep our body going, and we do need a certain amount of warmth, especially ordinary beings like us. We're not yet enlightened enough to be able to bear with a great deal of hot or cold or whatever, and we haven't gone past the point yet where we can put up with hunger and thirst and so on, and see it, and without the mind getting upset. So maybe we have a certain level that we need to keep up, but beyond that level, and that of course it's different for everybody, beyond that level, everything is more than enough, is too much, becomes too much. So if we're always craving for a certain type of food, for instance, and we don't want to eat this food, or we don't want to eat that food, but we always want to eat that kind of food, there again is the mind of lack. And so if we don't mind what food we get, if every food that we get is delicious, is tasty in its own way, we see it as tasty and delicious in its own way, and we're willing to share it, and to not bring any judgment to it, not make any comparisons, not make any judgment, then we have the mind of abundance. Then we have the mind that is always going to be satisfied, and is going to be free of craving. It's going to be free of craving for this, or craving for that. And so, as Geshe Sonam Rinchen says, the more we can train our mind to be like that, and even if we have to go a day or two without food, the mind is happy, the mind is peaceful and content. It's okay. It's probably going to be good for me to go without food for a day, or 2 days, or even 3 days. It'll be good for it'll be good for me to do a fast. We can intentionally take a fast to persuade the mind that actually we are contented. We're not craving for something. We can see some benefit in the situation, and through the assuming some benefit in the situation, we can make our minds happy and contented and peaceful. Then we are on the road to renunciation. We're developing renunciation. We're developing a way for the mind to be free of disturbing emotions, of these emotions that come up, this anger and jealousy and desire, and all these emotions, which all have their root in craving for something to be this way, or craving something to not to be that way, craving for it to be like this, craving it for it not to be like that. So when we have that kind of mind, then all these other emotions, all these other disturbing emotions come along, like anger when things don't go our way, or jealousy when we see that things go the way that we want for somebody else, but they don't go that way for us, or that there's some lack that we are projecting onto our situation, and we react to that lack with some kind of negative emotion. This is how we're training this is what Geshe Sonam Rinchen is saying. We train our minds in this way to be more and more satisfied with whatever we land up with, whatever we get. Whatever situation we find ourselves in, we try to develop the mind that sees benefit and is satisfied, is contented. And this is the way to develop renunciation, to lay the ground for developing bodhicitta and then the correct view. Because you cannot develop bodhicitta, and you cannot develop the correct view unless you have renunciation. Even just going into meditation retreat, it's very difficult if you don't have some renunciation. If you're going to sit in meditation, doesn't matter, even you go to a very beautiful meditation center, and there, there's everything there. Your food is given to you, it's prepared for you and given to you, and you're sitting in a hut by yourself, and everything is provided. It's not too cold, it's not too hot. But if you're sitting in that hut, in that kind of situation, not even in the cave, but sitting in a fairly comfortable hut, you've got a decent bed and so on, and your mind is still running off the comforts of home, or your partner, or whatever, your job, whatever. If your mind is still running off to these things, then there's very little renunciation. So when we go into meditation, we try to free ourselves from all those sorts of things, all the outside things, and just focus in on our mind and try to develop the mind that whatever happens, it is okay. Whatever presents itself in this meditation is okay. It is good. It is workable. I can do something with it. And of course, there are times when the mind gets very upset. Then, of course, one has to get up from the meditation seat and do something else. But even then, we can say, okay, this is teaching me something. I can get some benefit out of this. This is good that the mind is doing this. I can see what this mind gets up to. And I can learn how to tame this mind, how to slowly take hold of it, and slowly stop it from doing this kind of thing, transform, so that it doesn't do this sort of thing in the future. So if this is the mind of renunciation, giving up all the longings and the cravings and all those sorts of things. It doesn't mean giving up friends. It doesn't mean necessarily giving up your partner. It doesn't mean giving up the pleasures of your life, but it does mean giving up the cravings for those things. It does mean giving up the longing and the craving and the grasping for those things. So if you can go to the meditation center and sit down and those things don't occur to your mind at all, then there's a measure of renunciation in your mind. But if you sit down in the meditation, you go to a meditation center and a meditation retreat, and all your mind is still fussing around those things, then of course not much renunciation, and then not much benefit from the meditation. So Geshe Sonam Rinchen goes on, a multitude of disturbing emotions and carelessness are responsible for our unwholesome physical actions and speech. Ethical discipline consists of decreasing such actions and the craving to have the best of everything just for ourselves. While these concerns haunt us, our practice will not be genuine, even if we meditate extensively day and night. Pure practice can arise only when we stop craving the ordinary pleasures of this life, as well as the joys and comforts of future lives. So, why did the Buddha make such a fuss about ethical discipline? Everything in the Buddha's teachings is underpinned by ethical discipline. So as Geshe Sonam Rinchen says, ethical discipline helps us to overcome the negative minds, the negative emotions, disturbing emotions, and keeps us on track. Keeps us on the track of our spiritual journey. That's the purpose of ethical discipline. Ethical discipline means non-harm, and non-harm to ourselves and non-harm to others. So if we look at what harms us and what harms others, we will see that the main thing that harms us and harms others is afflictive emotion. When we get angry, we harm ourselves, we harm others. When we get fearful, we do actions that harm ourselves and harm others. So the driving force for all our suffering is afflictive emotion and karma. So ethical discipline, of course, we can't just give up afflictive emotions just like that. Click your finger and suddenly all your afflictive emotions, all your anger, fear, arrogance, doubt, and all these sorts of things disappear. That's not going to happen, of course. So we need to take time. We need to take maybe a very long period of time to slowly transform these things into something much more positive. And the way we do that is to develop renunciation and to develop ethical discipline. So ethical discipline is our assistant, assists us to develop this mind of renunciation. We give up all the things that persuade the mind to go in a negative direction, in a direction that's opposite to our spiritual path, to our spiritual our spiritual journey. So, for instance, ethical discipline, the basic ethical discipline is the 10 non-virtuous actions, avoiding the 10 non-virtuous actions, which are killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, gossip, slander, harsh words, harmful thoughts to others, holding wrong views, and being covetous. Now, if you look at each one of those, they each have an element of harm. I mean, killing is very obvious. It harms the other. It harms the being that we're killing, and also, although we might not see it immediately, it actually harms us because it is encouraging a very negative aspect of mind, a very negative mindset that I like killing, that killing is okay, harming others is okay. And that, from a karmic point of view, that is going to rebound on us in a very in a way of great suffering. It's going to bring us a great deal of suffering in a not very pleasant way at all. So that kind of mind, this is the kind of mind that pushes us, that it creates the karma that pushes us into a suffering existence. And so if the karma from that kind of craving arises when we're in the bardo, in the intermediate state, and we're looking for another life, that karma arises, that craving for another life is going to drive us, and that karma is going to drive us into a very unpleasant kind of life, and we're going to suffer a great deal. So when we look at killing, when we look at non-ethical discipline, or non-ethical actions like killing, then we can see it harms other, but it also harms us even more. And so all the 10 non-virtuous actions, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, gossip, slander, and harsh words, harmful thoughts to others, holding wrong views, and being covetous, all those actions have this element of harming both other and ourselves, or at least harming ourselves, but usually also harming other. But the harm to ourselves is much greater than the harm to the other, because one of the characteristics of karma, as we'll see a bit later, is that it multiplies. So that thought on your mind, that impetus on your mind that we place in our mind when we do something negative, has the capacity, has the ability to grow, like an acorn. Like an acorn can produce a huge oak tree with many more acorns. Similarly, an action, even a small negative action, can create an enormously suffering result. So the reason for attending to our ethical discipline, keeping ethical discipline, is to develop this mind of renunciation. And having renunciation and ethical discipline, we can then develop the minds of bodhicitta, and that leads us to the correct view of reality, to a very firm foundation for the correct view of reality, which will lead us to liberation, which will lead us, if we have the correct motivation, will lead us eventually to Buddhahood, not only to liberation, but to Buddhahood. So if it's very important that if we want to develop the three principal aspects of the path, that we take care of our ethical discipline, and that we make our lives as constructive as possible, keeping our ethical discipline so that we don't harm others, but then also, as much as possible, thinking of others, thinking of how we can be of assistance to others, even if we don't do many actions in assistance to others, even if we're not in a position to help others in a very extensive way. Nevertheless, if in our thoughts we are continually thinking how to help others, or continually generating the wish to be of benefit to others, most important, generating this wish to be of benefit to others, in whatever way will benefit them. We continually try to generate that kind of mind. Then we are, you can see that having that kind of mind helps in developing renunciation, because we're not always thinking of ourselves and, oh, now I've got to have this, now I've got to have that. Why don't I get that? Why isn't that coming to me? Why don't things go my way? Why do things always go the other person's way and never my way? We're having that kind of mind. You can see that mind is very self-orientated, very me orientated. And as long as we have that kind of mind, the more we concentrate on that kind of me, then the less able we are to develop any renunciation, because the mind has this habit then of always going, what is going to benefit me? What can I get? What can I get out of it? And that leads from one unhappy situation to another. So, as Geshe Tsunade Rinchen also says, while we have those concerns in our mind, while we always wishing for things for ourselves, longing for our own benefit, and having very little renunciation in our mind, then actually no matter what practice we do, it's going to be spoiled. It's going to be kind of polluted, and it's not going to generate the results that we actually want. As he says, the practice will not be genuine. If we don't have genuine type of renunciation, at least a mind that intends to develop renunciation and putting in actions that increase our renunciation, then our practice, whatever practice we do, is not going to lead to our liberation. It's going to be always the mind is going to be going back to samsaric existence. And so we're going to stay in samsara, even though we meditate day in and day out. We will stay in samsara, and we won't make any progress to gaining liberation. The pure practice, as he says, we can only arise when we give up our desires for the comforts and our craving for the comforts and the addictions of this life. And when I talk about addictions, I don't mean addictions like drug addictions or even alcohol addictions. Of course, we're talking about those as well, but we all have some kind of addiction to something. We have to look into our mind and see what we're addicted to. Is it coffee? Is it chocolate? Is it, I can certainly say that my mind has a certain amount of addiction to chocolate, a certain level of addiction to chocolate. So perhaps that's something I have to work on. But we all, if we look into our minds, as long as we're ordinary people, if we look into our minds, we'll see some kind of addiction there, something that will constantly trigger our craving and make us do certain actions that seem on a certain level, these actions seem to be innocuous. Then what can another square of chocolate, how can that harm me? So of course, in the immediate situation, it's probably not going to be of much harm unless it's about the 200th bar of square of chocolate that I'm eating. And of course, then it'll be may be of great harm. But in the long run, it's not the chocolate that's the problem, as I've said before. It is that craving that is never satisfied. I take that square of chocolate, then immediately mind, even while I'm eating it, the mind is thinking, oh, where's the next one? Where's the next one? That's the problem. That's the one that is actually causing all my difficulties and problems. That craving, because it never dies. It never goes away. It's never satisfied. I can never finish it. I can never say, okay, that's enough chocolate, because that mind of craving, that habit of craving mind, is not allowing me to develop renunciation. The renunciation of chocolate, as it were, whatever it is that the mind is craving, it never stops. And it doesn't, you think it stops when I die, but that mind of craving will not stop when I die. That mind of craving will have an imprint and a habit that will carry on into other lives, and it'll reawaken again in other lives. Once again, it will become, it'll be triggered. And again, the object might be different, might not be chocolate this time, but something else will be there, and the thing will keep going. Whereas in this life, we can develop as much renunciation as possible. Give up the craving and develop a contentment and satisfaction as much as possible. Then that will also be triggered in other lives. That kind of mind will again be triggered in other lives, and we can build in other lives. We can build that mind of satisfaction, that mind of contentment, that mind that sees all the cravings like scorpions, the cravings and the grasping like scorpions ready to sting us. And when we can see our cravings and graspings like that, then we have a much better way of being free and of developing renunciation. Because if you examine very closely, you can see that the craving is in the nature of suffering. You can see that when that craving never gives up, never gives up stinging us. I have the chocolate now and I'm satisfied for the next 2 hours, but then at some stage it stings again. It raises its tail and it stings again. And now the mind goes, chocolate, I need chocolate. And then what do? Automatically, without thinking, I go and I get chocolate and I eat chocolate, and the poison continues. The poison continues in the mind. The poison continues to poison me from in this life, in coming lives, endlessly, until I can develop the renunciation and say, okay, I'm not, even though the thought arises in my mind, that the sting comes up, the tail comes up to sting again, but this time I say no, and I just observe it. I just observe the craving and let it pass. Let it be, let it pass. And then it goes down for a while. Of course, it will come back up again, because the scorpion of craving won't die easily. But the more I can allow it to be and let it pass and not indulge in it, and that's the process of renunciation. And then the more I can do that, the greater the habit I develop. The greater the habit I develop, and as I say, it'll go from life to life, and I won't be tormented by it so much. So this is what ethical training, ethical discipline helps in. It helps us to develop this kind of mind, and this is partly why the Buddha said monks, for instance, should eat only once a day. Of course, that was to help the villagers in the Buddha's day, so that the villagers weren't continually feeding hordes and hordes of monks, which would be very onerous for them. But part of it was also that monks should give up give up the craving for food, the craving for cups of tea and so on, the sort of things that we are so familiar with, that we take so much for granted. But the monk eating only once a day is able to, keeping that vow to eat only once a day, is able to develop a mind of renunciation towards sustenance. So it's not that the monk is giving up eating altogether. Of course, that would be extremely difficult. But it's the monk is eating only once a day, so that the monk is satisfied, it keeps the body going, is not, doesn't become weak in his practice, but is generating the mind of renunciation with respect to food. And similarly, all the things that the monk is not allowed to do, is helping to develop the mind of renunciation. Not, it's not that the monk is necessarily looking for a difficult life. It's much more that the monk is wanting to develop the mind of renunciation, because that is the foundation for developing loving kindness, compassion for others, and the correct view. If you have that foundation of renunciation, then the spiritual path becomes much easier, and the mind is not captured very easily at all by external, the comforts and external things that a normal person lusts after. So that is our discussion on this verse. For you embodied beings bound by the craving for existence, without the pure determination to be free from the ocean of existence, there is no way for you to pacify the attractions to its pleasurable effects. Thus, from the outset, seek to generate the determination to be free. The determination to be free is renunciation. So, renouncing this craving and grasping, and eventually renouncing the ignorance as well that drives them. So now let's stop here, and thank you very much for joining me, and I hope you've got some benefit out of it. Please have a very peaceful and happy week until we meet again, if I'm still alive next week. Stay safe, stay well, and as we go, let's just take a moment to dedicate whatever positive potential we've developed today to whatever our purpose was in the beginning. So thinking about your motivation and then dedicating the positive potential to that motivation, let's just take a moment to do that. So, thank you very much and goodbye.